Listen, you might think I've lost my mind for what I'm about to say. Just half a minute ago, I was pressing down with both hands on a black plastic body bag. Inside that bag was my comrade. He got badly wounded on the front lines, already gone, and I zipped it up myself. But now the helicopter's still rocking in the air, and from that bag, which was supposed to hold a dead man, a sound suddenly came out. That sound was loud enough to drown out the roar of the rotors above. The weird voice was eerily steady, not a single stutter, like that fake, robotic announcer voice you hear on school intercoms. It was reciting an address one I knew all too well. It was my home, the street in front of my old house, the house number and my wife's name. It just kept repeating it over and over, cold and lifeless, with no warmth of a living person. I was so scared my palms were drenched in sweat, and I didn't dare let go. That's when I saw the black waterproof canvas of the bag suddenly bulge outward. It wasn't shaped like a human hand or foot. 3 sharp, pointy bumps pushed up from inside the bag, thin and long, stiff as 3 thick chopsticks. These 3 bony spikes moved slowly inside, sliding upward against the thick fabric. As they slid, they made a harsh scraping sound, like hard plastic rubbing together, creeping along the edge of the bag inch by inch toward my wrist. The gunner next to me was shouting curses, his face pale, both hands gripping his weapon. The helicopter cabin shook violently in the wind, and empty shell casings on the floor clattered left and right as the aircraft tilted. The voice from the bag kept going, after reciting my wife's name. It even started saying the red jacket my daughter was wearing when she left for school this morning. The voice was smooth, no breaths, no pauses. My eyes were locked on those 3 spikes climbing upward. Whatever was inside seemed to know exactly where my hands were. Suddenly, the 3 spikes sped up, jabbing straight toward my fingertips. The canvas stretched so thin it turned white, about to tear through. I yanked my hands back just in time. The 3 spikes stabbed into empty air, pushing 3 sharp little peaks into the black waterproof canvas, barely missing my fingernails. Staring at that bag as it kept deforming, my mind went blank, and I couldn't help thinking back to 2 hours earlier. Back then it was pitch black, with thick layers of heavy clouds pressing down low. The ground was covered in blasted mud, sticky underfoot. We had just landed the helicopter on that abandoned field landing pad. The place was littered with torn barbed wire and smelled of burnt rubber. Me and 3 other soldiers got orders to pick up this wounded soldier. He was lying on a stretcher in the mud. I rushed over, ready to help lift. As I bent down to grab the stretcher handle, my eyes accidentally glanced at the soles of his boots. The whole area was nothing but mud. My boots, everyone else's boots, all caked with thick yellow mud. But this soldier lying on the stretcher, the soles of his boots were spotless. Not a speck of mud. Instead, they were coated with some kind of black, shiny slime. It looked a lot like engine oil leaking from a car, reflecting a greenish tint under the flashlight. The gunfire on the front line was intense, booming so loud my ears rang. I didn't have time to think about those strange boot soles. I gritted my teeth and heaved the stretcher up. That lift nearly threw my back out. The soldier's body was unnaturally heavy. There were 4 of us, all strong, healthy guys. Normally, we could carry 2 wounded men without breaking a sweat. But this time, all 4 of us shouted at once, faces red, barely managing to lift the stretcher off the ground. The 2 solid steel bars, as thick as a thumb, let out a sharp creak the moment we lifted. I looked down. Those bars were already bending downward under the soldier's weight, warped like cooked noodles. We shuffled inch by inch, straining with all our might, and finally managed to haul that body, heavy as a solid block of iron, swaying into the helicopter's rear compartment. As soon as we were inside, the rotors started spinning wildly, the wind blasting loose stones off the ground, sending them clattering everywhere. I quickly crouched down and began checking the soldier's injuries according to protocol. His face had suffered extremely severe physical damage, to the point where his features were unrecognizable. He lay there motionless, his chest completely still. I extended my right hand, pressed my index and middle fingers together, and firmly placed them against the side of his neck, trying to feel if his carotid artery was still pulsing. The moment I pressed down, the sensation under my fingertips left me completely stunned. There was no faint, rhythmic pulse of a living person's blood vessels beneath his skin. Instead, my fingers felt an intensely hard, high-speed rotational vibration. It was exactly like pressing your palm flat against the engine of a wildly running small lawnmower. It felt as if countless tiny gears were hidden under his skin, scraping against each other and spinning at breakneck speed. The hard objects beneath his skin jabbed painfully into my fingertips, making me yank my hand back. At that very moment, without any breathing motion, the soldier's chest suddenly and inexplicably caved inward. It sank a full 10 centimeters deep, forming a large hollow. The sound suggested that all the bones inside had instantly melted into a soft liquid. His entire neck also stretched out eerily, with a crisp snap from the joints. Seeing this, I knew he had completely lost any signs of life. I turned around, pulled a black waterproof canvas body bag from the crate behind me, and steeled myself to stuff this heavy, faintly vibrating body into the bag. I grabbed the zipper with both hands and yanked it up. As the zipper closed, the strange soldier was sealed inside the black bag. At that moment, the helicopter forcibly took off, wobbling as it ascended into the sky. The fierce wind outside the cabin howled in through the unsealed door, chilling me to the bone. I was about to sit back down in my seat to catch my breath, but before my butt even touched the bench, the black body bag I had just zipped up suddenly went taut at my feet. That was when the synthetic voice, as steady as a radio, suddenly emerged from inside the bag. No sooner had the zipper closed than the bag began to stir. The noise was intense, nothing like a living person struggling or writhing inside. It was a dull, dense sound of bones snapping, as if someone were smashing a large iron hammer against a dead tree trunk covered in dry branches. Crack, crack, crack. These crisp sounds of bone fractures rang out in succession. With each noise, the black waterproof canvas body bag shuddered violently. Then the bottom of the bag, which held a corpse, suddenly stood upright from the cabin floor without any support. It rose like a black popsicle standing in the wind, no feet, no hands, just rigidly erect before me. The synthetic voice, as steady as a radio, suddenly boomed louder. It began rapidly repeating my wife's name and the color of my house back home. The gunner beside me was sitting on a small stool. When he saw this, he screamed in terror. Shouting, he grabbed the rifle propped beside him with both hands. His face was as white as paper, drained of all color, his eyes wide and his lips trembling. Without hesitation, he aimed the muzzle at the upright black body bag, pushed the safety off with his thumb, and locked his index finger on the trigger. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Muzzle flashes flickered wildly in the cramped cabin, casting alternating light and shadow on the surrounding metal panels. The gunfire was deafening, like firecrackers going off right next to my ears, making my head throb with pain. Bullets flew one after another in a line, slamming into the black waterproof canvas bag at close range. But something bizarre happened. These rifle rounds, capable of piercing steel plates, failed to punch a single hole in that thin canvas bag. The bag's surface didn't even spark, and no fabric fragments flew off. The sound of the bullets hitting it was extremely strange, a dull thud, like someone smashing a thick, hard tire with a heavy wooden club. Thud, 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 boom, boom, boom. Every bullet fired at that spot caused the canvas to deeply dent inward. But immediately after, a tremendous physical rebound force erupted from the depression. It felt as if it were packed with powerful latex, pushing the bullets right back out, unchanged. The deformed copper-jacketed bullets, all whistling sharply, were forcefully flung back along their original trajectories. Whoosh, whoosh. The misshapen bullets ricocheted wildly off the helicopter's steel cabin walls, striking the green paint and leaving bright, gleaming white marks, accompanied by a chaotic clanging. One stray bullet shot right past my ear, scraping my cheek painfully. Seeing the bullets were useless, the machine gunner grew even more frenzied. While continuing to frantically pull the trigger, he lifted his right foot clad in a heavy leather boot and desperately kicked at the midsection of the black bag. His boot sole thudded heavily against the bag. In that instant, the previously upright bag suddenly stiffened, its internal folded hard bones thrusting outward. The gunner's kick felt as if he had struck a bulldozer at full throttle. A massive force recoiled up his leg, and with a crisp crack, the bone in his thigh was violently dislocated by the rebounding physical force. He lost his balance, let out a sharp cry, and stumbled backward, sliding along the tilted cabin floor. His back slammed heavily into a pile of first aid kits, shattering the plastic boxes and scattering bandages and medicine bottles everywhere. Just then, a powerful gust of wind swept past the helicopter, causing the entire aircraft to tilt sharply to the left. Freed from the bullet suppression, the black body bag began sliding along the slanted cabin wall. The bones and spikes inside continued to snap and rearrange, emitting an even denser series of cracking sounds. As it toppled toward me, the emotionless synthetic voice inside began reciting my daughter's school class number and her seat row. The voice, separated only by the black cloth, blared right in front of my nose. I scrambled backward, the back of my head slamming hard against the helicopter's seat frame, pain exploding behind my eyes. My hands flailed across the floor, grabbing a handful of nylon ropes used to secure cargo. The black bag continued inching closer. With every shift on the cabin floor, the metal plating beneath groaned under the strain, a deep, heavy sound indicating the increasing weight inside. The originally smooth aluminum alloy floor was now marked with distinct, curved indentations. Nearby, the machine gunner lay on the floor, unable to put weight on one leg, using only his arms to desperately crawl across the medicine-slick surface. As he crawled, he reached for the walkie-talkie fallen in the corner, trying to call out to the pilot in the cockpit. Just as his fingers brushed the walkie-talkie's antenna, the upright black body bag suddenly bent horizontally at the middle. It wasn't falling over, rather. Its internal structure, in a way utterly defying ordinary anatomy, bent the waist bones backward at a 90-degree angle. Then, like a massive spring, it used this bizarre physical elasticity to violently lunge forward. The entire bag swept through the air with a great rush of dark wind, heading straight for the machine gunner. Lying on the floor, I watched the huge black shadow fly past. It moved so fast that the air even carried a sharp, tearing sound, like fabric being ripped. Hearing the noise above, the gunner instinctively raised his arms to block. A dull thud echoed. The black body bag, heavy as a large iron block, slammed brutally onto the gunner's forearms. The metal watch on his wrist shattered instantly, sending glittering components and glass shards flying. The bones in his arms, under the terrifying impact, emitted a sound like dry twigs being crushed, and both limbs went instantly limp, their skeletal joints pulverized into powder by the blow. The gunner didn't even have time to cry out. The physical force lifted him off the ground, and the back of his head struck the helicopter's inner steel wall with a bang, denting the reinforced bulletproof plate and causing large flakes of green paint to peel away. He slid down along the cabin wall, collapsing into a heap of torn bandages, eyes rolled back, white foam bubbling from his mouth. His hands twisted grotesquely. After hitting the person, the black body bag drifted lightly back to the ground. It landed right in the helicopter's only rear escape route, completely blocking it. Outside, a massive bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, casting a stark, pale light inside the cabin. I noticed that the waterproof canvas on the surface of the bag had developed several long white cracks from the violent impact moments earlier. These weren't ordinary fabric tears. They looked more like something inside was growing too fast, slowly stretching the outer shell apart. No blood seeped from the cracks. Instead, they revealed something dark, glossy, and rigid, shifting slightly within. Under the lightning's glare, the edges reflected a cold, metallic sheen, lined with dense, tiny serrations that seemed to be gnawing away at the remaining canvas. The rigid synthetic voice suddenly paused. Just as I thought it might fall silent, the voice split into a dual tone. One part continued reciting my daughter's name in its original pitch, while an identical tone began loudly and fluently reciting the hometown address of the machine gunner lying unconscious nearby. The two voices echoed simultaneously in the narrow cabin, cluttered with twisted metal panels, overlapping and amplifying each other. They grew so loud it sounded like two old radios blaring different channels at once, vibrating the helicopter's windshield until it emitted faint cracking sounds. The helicopter continued climbing, its engine whine growing sharper. The entire aircraft shook violently, like a sieve, causing shattered glass and shell casings on the floor to bounce and rattle. Then the two overlapping voices cut off abruptly. The cabin fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the mechanical roar of the engine and rotors above, pounding rhythmically against my eardrums. The once upright black body bag suddenly went limp, collapsing with a soft thud onto the cluttered aluminum alloy floor. It lay completely still, its sharp protrusions retracted, and the white cracks on the canvas surface sealed shut. The machine gunner remained unconscious in the corner, his head tilted to the side, breathing lightly with a wheezing, bellows-like snore. I gripped the steel frame of my seat tightly, pressing my back against the farthest wall of the cabin, not daring to take my eyes off the bag on the floor for even a second. I gasped for air, each cold breath burning like fire in my throat. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but the bag didn't move, and the rigid computer-synthesized voice didn't return. The situation seemed to have temporarily eased. Maybe whatever was inside had been damaged during the physical impact, or perhaps the bullets, though deflected, had shattered some core component with their sheer force. Trying to calm my racing heart, I clung to these thoughts as a feeble reassurance. The helicopter continued flying steadily forward, and the lightning outside began to subside. Grabbing an undamaged first aid kit, I braced myself with both hands on the floor and slowly crawled toward the machine gunner, hoping to stabilize his broken arm. As I passed by the black bag, I suddenly noticed a change in the scattered copper-jacketed bullet casings on the floor. The bullets, previously deformed by the bag's physical rebound, lay flattened in the grooves of the metal panels. But now, a dozen or so casings near the bag were rapidly losing their golden copper color. It was as if they were exposed to some invisible, extreme heat, the metal surface melting away before my eyes. Within seconds, the casings transformed into silvery gray, mercury-like liquid, slowly spreading across the helicopter's floor. Not only that, but a liquid began seeping out from the bottom of the bag in large patches. It was crystal clear, shimmering, odorless, and looked just like clean tap water. The transparent liquid spread across the tilted floor. When it met the mercury-like metal liquid, the two combined with an almost imperceptible hiss. Looking down, I saw clearly that upon contact with the transparent liquid, the metal liquid began rearranging itself. It extended into extremely fine silver lines, straight and precise, as if someone were using a ruler and the finest pen to sketch an intricate, miniature circuit board pattern onto the helicopter's metal floor. These delicate patterns crept along the seams of the panels, slowly advancing toward the pilot's control console. My boot sole, accidentally stepped on a bit of transparent liquid at the edge. In that instant, my right shoe sole let out a piercing screech. I tried to lift my foot to walk, but found that part of the sole was firmly stuck to the steel plate. The adhesive force was astonishingly strong, as if someone had smeared an entire bottle of the strongest industrial glue under my shoe, welding the rubber and the helicopter's aluminum alloy plate together completely. I had to desperately shake my thigh, pulling back with both hands and feet, before I heard a tearing sound. A thick chunk of rubber from my boot sole was ripped clean off, left in the middle of that eerie miniature pattern. The torn rubber fell to the ground and was immediately swallowed by the transparent liquid, melting away without a trace within seconds. At that moment, the green overhead lights suddenly flickered a few times, emitting a crackling electrical sound. I looked up and realized it wasn't just the lights in the rear cabin flickering. The red and yellow indicator lights on the control panel in the cockpit were also pulsing on and off in sync with the same rhythm. The green overhead light swayed violently once before completely extinguishing. The entire cabin plunged into darkness, with only the broken red lights on the cockpit control panel still casting faint red glows backward at regular intervals. With a crisp snap, the black canvas body bag on the floor split open right down the middle. The body that had been lying there didn't use its hands to push itself up. Its entire upper torso rose stiffly from the floor, like a wooden stake pulled up by a spring. The two structures that had once been human thighs were now completely fused together, forming an exceptionally thick, black metallic-hued pillar of flesh. The base of that fleshy pillar was firmly suctioned to the aluminum alloy floor, covering all the intricate silver-gray lines beneath it. Its arms had transformed completely as well. The original fingers and skin were gone, replaced by 4 slender, elongated black bones covered in sharp barbs. These bones closely resembled the steel crane arms on a dock crane, extending outward one after another under the faint red light, growing to over 2 meters long. The rifle bullets that had been fired into its body and flattened began dropping out one by one from the black, hardened surface of its skin. Clink, clink. A dozen or so copper bullet casings clattered against the steel plate, their crisp sounds echoing sharply in the quiet cabin. It had no face, where its mouth should have been. Its jaw split open to the left and right, revealing rows of horizontally aligned metallic bone spikes. These spikes looked eerily like steel needles on a sewing machine, moving up and down at an extremely rapid pace, grating against each other with a harsh, scraping sound. The rigid, emotionless synthetic voice rang out again amidst the intense friction of these bone spikes. This time, its volume grew even louder than before. It continued loudly, reciting the license plate number of the school bus my daughter would take this year. Simultaneously, the other 3 bone crane arms on its body began emitting different human voices. One bone arm was fluently reciting the unconscious machine gunner's private bank card password in a clear voice. Another bone arm emitted the voice of the pilot up front, loudly repeating the pilot's home phone number. These entirely different voices burst out simultaneously from the same black body, echoing madly within the narrow steel cabin. The straight and orderly silver lines crawling across the floor suddenly lit up, emitting a faint blue glow. As these lines brightened, the thick fleshy pillar formed by the fusion of the creature's legs began to move across the floor. For every centimeter it advanced, dense blue sparks erupted between the base of the fleshy pillar and the steel plate of the aircraft. The sound was like someone frantically welding steel plates with an electric welder, crackling incessantly. The aluminum alloy floor was scraped into a deep, blackened, charred groove, exposing the white steel reinforcement beneath. By the immense physical force of its movement, it was advancing toward the unconscious machine gunner. I gripped the nearby seatbelt with both hands, trying to stand up, but the sole of my right shoe had been torn off by the adhesive liquid earlier. Barefoot on the icy, glass-strewn floor, the pain made it impossible to muster any strength. The 4 black bones, like crane arms, swung incessantly in the air, forcibly scraping through several reinforced aluminum alloy ribs on the helicopter's cabin walls. The torn metal emitted a piercing, screeching sound, like nails on a chalkboard. Suddenly, a terrified scream came from the cockpit up front. The pilot frantically pulled the control stick forward, causing the entire helicopter to roll unnaturally to the right at a steep angle. The first aid kit on the floor, scattered rifles, and the unconscious gunner all slid toward the left as the floor tilted sharply. But the black, fused flesh pillar of the monster did not budge. Its base seemed to have fused with the helicopter's steel plating. No matter how violently the aircraft rolled, its body remained firmly rooted in place. Its long, bony appendages suddenly dropped in unison as the helicopter tilted, latching tightly onto the bulletproof door on the left side of the cabin. Crack! Under the strain of those bony limbs, the reinforced steel hinges of the heavy, bulletproof door weighing dozens of kilograms twisted and snapped. A fierce gust of wind, mixed with icy rain, roared through the gaping tear and flooded into the cabin. Bandages and plastic bottles scattered across the floor were swept into the air, swirling wildly. The monster remained motionless amid the raging storm, its overlapping voices continuing to layer. After reciting my daughter's school bus license plate number, it began listing how many trees were planted in my childhood home's yard and the color of the fence. Every word was unnervingly precise, delivered without the slightest hint of distortion or static. Its long, bony limbs began to tremble in the violent wind. With each tremor, the silver lines inside the helicopter flickered in response. At that moment, the control panel up front went completely haywire. All the instrument needles spun wildly, slapping against their housings with sharp clacks. From the engine compartment above the cabin came a deep, unsettling groan like a massive block of iron grinding against gears. The helicopter began to spiral downward from hundreds of meters in the air, tumbling like a weightless, dried leaf. I was pinned against the rear seat by immense centrifugal force, my hands completely immobilized. Then, the black flesh pillar formed by the monster's merged legs began to rise. As it pulled its base from the steel floor, sparks erupted in showers. The aluminum alloy plating beneath it had been sucked into a deep, circular depression from the earlier force. The metal now cracked and split open, revealing the dark night sky outside. The faceless head turned slowly, its barbed black bony limbs gradually aligning with the corner where I was trapped. One of the barbed bones extended segment by segment through the air, the grinding of its joints drowning out even the roar of the storm outside. Its voice, like the screech of sewing machine needles, began to enunciate, word by word, the exact sleeping position of my wife in our bed at home. The barbed black limb emitted a series of sharp cracks as it thrust straight toward my face. From the nearest black bone, the rigid, synthesized voice boomed the details of my wife's sleeping posture, so loud it filled my ears with a deafening buzz. I kicked desperately against the floor, my back pressed hard against the leg of the metal seat behind me. My right hand flailed blindly, grabbing a spare pistol the gunner had dropped earlier. Without even checking the safety, I gripped it with both hands and fired repeatedly at the black bone hurtling toward my face. Bang! 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 Muzzle flashes erupted at point-blank range, rounds slamming one after another into the dark, hardened bone. Each impact sparked tiny blue flares. The bone was as tough as reinforced ballistic steel. The pistol rounds left no marks, only chipping away faint white dust from its blackened surface. Deflected bullets ricocheted wildly around the cramped metal cabin. One stray round grazed my thigh, tearing open my pants and leaving a deep white gash. My hands shook uncontrollably. The pistol's magazine emptied quickly, the firing pin clicking uselessly against air. I hurled the empty gun at the monster's split jaw. The pistol shattered against the sewing machine needle-like bone spikes, shredded into scrap metal that clattered to the floor. The fused flesh pillar of the monster suddenly shifted half a step forward. With that shift, its base scraped against the steel floor, sending up another shower of dense sparks. Just then, the helicopter lurched violently in the air once more. The entire aircraft began tilting sharply toward the gaping hole on the left side, where the door had been torn off. Everything on the floor that wasn't secured broken metal fragments, damaged first aid kits, and the unconscious machine gunner lying on the ground all slid, rumbling toward that dark, gaping maw. Half of the machine gunner's body had already slipped out of the helicopter. Ignoring the pain in my thigh, I clawed desperately at the steel floor with both hands, grabbing the nylon strap on the back of the machine gunner's uniform. My thigh was jammed tightly against the metal frame of the seat, and using that leverage, I mustered every ounce of strength to haul him back inside. At that moment, the monster's bony appendage swung down. It didn't strike my face, but slammed heavily into the steel wall of the cabin above my head. With a deafening bang, the bulletproof steel plate was instantly smashed open, leaving a half-meter-wide hole. Wind and rain from outside poured violently through the newly created opening, drenching my collar in an instant. Up in the cockpit, the pilot was still screaming hysterically. He pounded frantically at the smoking instrument panel with his hands, while stomping on the rudder pedals with both feet. The helicopter's nose pitched up and down erratically, the entire aircraft lurching like a toy being violently shaken by a child in a storm. I noticed that every time the monster settled on a section of the steel floor, the glowing blue-silver lines inside the helicopter grew thicker. Those lines had already crept along the floor seams, climbing up the partition to the cockpit, and even beginning to spread beneath the pilot's seat. As they advanced, the sound of the helicopter's engine grew increasingly strangeless, like normal rotation, and more like someone grinding two massive stones violently against the turbine blades. Conventional bullets and weapons were utterly useless against this thing. I observed that each time it lifted its thick, black, fleshy pillar from the floor, the silver lines on the helicopter dimmed for a second or two. It was relying on the helicopter's metal frame to conduct some kind of energy. If I could find a way to sever that connection or completely disrupt its physical balance, it wouldn't be able to stay upright in this violently shaking cabin. I released my grip on the machine gunner's uniform, securing him tightly to a nearby steel pole with a safety harness. Then I began crawling desperately along the sloping floor toward the rear corner of the cabin. There, as a precaution against electrical failure at high altitude, a backup high-voltage heavy-duty battery was secured with a thick steel lock. The battery was made of solid lead, exceptionally large and heavy, like a foundation stone meant for smashing walls. With the helicopter still spinning uncontrollably, the crawl was agonizingly difficult. The transparent slime on the floor had spread to just ahead of my palms. I braced my hands firmly on the raised sections of steel untouched by the slime, my fingernails clogged with rust and mud. As I pushed back with one foot, I accidentally stepped on a sharp shard of glass. The sole of my shoe had already been torn off, and the glass sliced straight into my flesh, instantly staining a large patch of my sock black. Gritting my teeth without a sound, I lunged toward the backup battery. My hands grabbed the steel lock, fastening the battery. The buckle had been jammed shut by the helicopter's deformation and couldn't be pried open by hand. I raised my uninjured left boot and, mustering every bit of physical strength, slammed it fiercely into the steel buckle. Clang! My ankle went numb from the impact, but the jammed steel buckle finally snapped open with a click. The heavy black high-voltage battery, weighing dozens of kilograms, broke free from its mounting slot and rolled down the sloping floor, thudding against my stomach. At that moment, the monster seemed to sense my movement. Its black, barbed, bony appendage abruptly curved in midair, and with a sharp whistling sound, swept horizontally toward the corner where I was crouched. There was nowhere left to hide. I wrapped both arms tightly around the heavy battery, braced my legs against the cabin wall behind me, and held the battery horizontally against my chest. Thud! The black bone-like crane arm slammed viciously into the hard plastic shell of the battery. The immense physical impact instantly cracked the battery casing in several places. The force traveled straight through the battery and struck my chest. I heard a dull, heavy crunch from my own ribs, and a bitter taste flooded my mouth. Clutching the battery, I was sent tumbling sideways across the floor by the blow, rolling over a meter before my back slammed into the steel frame of the rescue stretcher. The impact sent me skidding more than a meter across the floor, my back hitting the stretcher's steel frame with a heavy, dull thud. For a moment, my ribs burned as if on fire, but I didn't dare loosen my grip. My arm stayed locked tightly around the large black high-voltage battery, its casing now cracked. Just then, the helicopter lurched violently again, its nose nearly pointing straight down toward the ground. The monster, merged into a thick, black pillar of flesh, suddenly began shifting rapidly across the cabin floor. To resist the aircraft's violent roll, its form underwent another drastic physical change. Its outer layer of black, hardened skin split open, revealing over a dozen slender, branch-like tentacles that resembled dark, withered twigs. Covered in sharp, barbed spikes like rows of hardened iron nails, these tentacles snapped and clamped firmly into the reinforced aluminum alloy ribs of the cabin interior. It anchored itself firmly in the center of the cabin with these tentacles, resisting the tremendous centrifugal force. As the tentacles dug deeper, the silver lines on the helicopter floor thickened and brightened wildly. The faint blue glow suddenly intensified into a piercing, deep blue, accompanied by crackling sparks of electricity. From the cockpit, the pilot's voice had grown completely hoarse from shouting. Several red indicator lights on the control panel shattered with a pop, spraying glittering glass fragments across the pilot's face. The entire helicopter began spinning wildly in the air like a top, while fierce winds roared through the gaping hole on the left side, sweeping spent shell casings and plastic debris out into the raging storm. I lay on the floor, my legs wedged tightly between the legs of a collapsed seat to keep from being blown away by the gale. My eyes were fixed on the base of the monster, the very bottom of its fleshy pillar, where over a dozen tentacles connected. Each time a tentacle clamped onto the metal floor, it seared a small, charred pit into the surface. Gritting my teeth, I pushed the extremely heavy battery forward, inching across the floor slick with mucus and shattered glass. My bare right foot stepped on a broken aluminum alloy strip. Its sharp edge sliced deep into my flesh, but I didn't even glance at it. My gaze remained locked on the monster's body. As the helicopter tilted sharply to the left again, I used the downward slope to slide across the floor, shoving the heavy battery with all my might straight into the base of the monster. Crash! The cracked casing of the large battery struck the root of the monster's black, fused pillar with tremendous force. The battery shattered into several pieces from the impact. Inside, the thick, dark specialized fluid of the high-voltage battery splashed out instantly, drenching the monster's black tentacles embedded in the metal floor. The residual high-voltage charge within the battery, upon contacting the fluid, ignited a massive burst of bright blue sparks across the cabin floor. Zzz-boom. The sound was deafening, like 10,000 large firecrackers igniting at once overhead. Blue electrical sparks spread like a net across the helicopter's aluminum alloy floor, instantly reaching every corner. The move triggered an intense physical reaction. The black tentacles, drenched in the sparks and fluid, immediately emitted thick white smoke. The barbed spikes, once firmly anchored in the alloy ribs, began contracting unnaturally, section by section, under the strong electrical stimulation. With its base anchorage lost, the monster's massive black form, pulled by the helicopter's violent spinning, lurched sharply to the right. The sounds emanating from its body grew chaotic and distorted. The voice that had been reciting my wife's sleeping posture suddenly seized up, starting to repeat like a broken tape. Sleeping, sleep, sleep, posture. Meanwhile, the sounds from the other bone-like arms blended together. One moment the pilot's screams, the next the machine gunner's bank card password-rising and falling, growing increasingly chaotic, to steady itself in the shaking aircraft. The four black, crane-like bones of its upper body suddenly slammed down, clamping tightly onto the row of iron seats behind me. Crack! Under its terrifying force, the entire row of iron seats bolted to the cabin wall tore free. Their reinforced screws ripped out instantly. Row after row of seats crashed sideways onto the floor, collapsing the small corner where I was hiding. During the collapse, a broken iron pipe as thick as a thumb shot straight toward my right arm. Instinctively, I raised my arm to block it, but the pipe's physical impact was too powerful. With a sickening thud, the sharp end pierced clean through my right forearm. Half my sleeve was instantly soaked in red, and an excruciating pain shot from my wrist straight to the top of my skull. I roared in agony, gripping the pipe with my left hand and yanking with all my might. The monster began to frenzy. Its merged flesh pillar couldn't steady itself on the floor, relying instead on its 4 2-meter-long bone arms to swing and smash wildly inside the helicopter. Bang! 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 Each strike left another gaping hole in the cabin's iron walls. The 2 small bulletproof windows at the rear were already shattered to pieces, tempered glass shards raining down on my head and neck like a downpour. With extensive, severe physical damage to the fuselage, the helicopter shook increasingly violently, and the tail rotor began emitting an awful, grating screech of breaking metal. I knew that if I didn't find a way to force it out of the cabin, the aircraft would disintegrate midair in less than half a minute. Gritting through the searing pain in my right arm, I frantically groped with my left hand through the wreckage of the smashed first aid kits nearby. Amidst shards of glass and medicine bottles, my fingers suddenly brushed against something cold and hard. It was a heavy-duty emergency pry bar, used to force open the helicopter door in crises. Made from a single piece of high-strength alloy steel, the pry bar was over a meter long and felt incredibly heavy in my hand. Clutching it tightly against my chest with my left hand, I braced my knees against the floor, enduring the pain in my feet and arm, and inched my way toward the monster standing near the cabin door. At that moment, the monster's eye area remained smooth, hardened skin, but it seemed to sense my approach. One of its bone arms twisted in the air, its barbed hook glinting in the faint red light, then shot toward my abdomen at a horrifying speed. In such a confined space, there was no room to roll away. Gritting my teeth, I raised the alloy steel pry bar horizontally, mustering every ounce of physical strength in my arms to meet the oncoming black bone head-on. Clang! 2 incredibly hard structures collided midair with a deafening crash, sharp as 2 locomotives slamming together at full speed. The close-range metallic impact instantly deafened me, leaving only a long, ringing hum echoing in my mind. The impact split the skin between my left thumb and forefinger on the spot, sticky fluid dripping down the pry bar's handle. But I didn't drop the pry bar. The force of the collision was so immense that the barbed hook on the black bone arm wedged firmly into the curved V-shaped notch at the front of my alloy steel bar. The black bone writhed and struggled desperately in the notch, trying to wrench its arm free. The intense physical friction between the alloy steel pry bar and the black bone began emitting acrid wisps of white smoke, even producing a hissing sound like red-hot iron plunged into cold water. At that moment, the helicopter suddenly hit an extremely powerful updraft, lurching upward sharply before rolling violently to the left. The monstrous amalgamation of flesh, having been physically damaged by the high-voltage battery fluid earlier, could no longer anchor itself to the cracked floor with the tentacles at its base. Under the immense force of the violent turbulence, its entire body was dragged uncontrollably toward the gaping hole on the left where the door had been torn off. But the bone-like appendage I had jammed was still stubbornly gripping the crowbar in my hands. Half of its body now dangled outside the helicopter in the pitch-black night, battered by the torrential rain lashing against its dark form. It swayed violently in the fierce wind, and the tremendous downward pull transmitted directly through the crowbar to both of my arms. I was dragged by its weight, sliding rapidly across the smooth floor toward the gaping hole. My stomach was already pressed against the metal edge of the helicopter door. Clenching my teeth, I hooked my uninjured left foot desperately around a broken iron pipe lying across the floor, straining every muscle in my body for one final physical struggle against the massive creature now plummeting downward. The steel surface of the crowbar had begun to bend and deform in the middle, under the immense opposing forces of our struggle. Half of the creature's body hung outside, and the steel needle-like bone spikes in its split just spun even faster in the raging storm. The overlapping voices emanating from it suddenly merged into a single tone. It blended my daughter's name with the pilot's home phone number, creating an unbearably sharp, screeching noise like nails clawing frantically at glass shouting through the storm. I focused on the main skeletal joint trapped in the crowbar's groove. As the helicopter continued to spin wildly, the fierce wind outside tugged at the creature's body, twisting the main skeletal joint in the groove into an unnatural reverse curve. The black, hardened skin at that spot was already deeply scored with a white mark from the alloy steel edge of the crowbar, clearly nearing its physical limit. Summoning the last ounce of my strength, I pressed all my weight onto my left leg, which was hooked around the iron pipe. Then, freeing my left hand, I slowly inched it forward along the crowbar's handle. I reached the thickest stress point at the crowbar's midpoint, pushing my entire upper body forward. I braced my shoulder firmly against the crowbar's base. With a roar, I leveraged the helicopter's violent lurch to the right, using the rebound force to wrench the already deformed alloy steel crowbar downward against the creature's twisted main skeletal joint. A dull metallic crack echoed through the chaos. The heavy alloy steel crowbar snapped in two, the broken end grazing my cheek and leaving a long gash on my cheekbone. But in that same instant, the creature's main skeletal joint, trapped in the groove, dislocated and fractured completely under the immense leverage. The raging storm outside gave a fierce tug, and the massive black body, having lost its only point of leverage, was instantly ripped out of the helicopter by the gale force winds. It plummeted rapidly into the dark night, disappearing from sight within seconds. The helicopter shook increasingly violently in the air. The cracked tail emitted a sharp, grating sound in the wind, while two broken steel rods repeatedly struck the fuselage. The pilot up front, mustering his last ounce of strength, clung desperately to the control stick, guiding the entire aircraft as it careened erratically toward a large grassy field below. Thud! The helicopter's underside skidded across the grass for a considerable distance, churning up mud and shredded grass over 2 meters high. During the slide, it collided heavily with a dead tree before finally coming to a complete stop. I was thrown by the immense inertia, tumbling several times across the floor littered with shattered glass. My right arm had suffered a complete shoulder dislocation during the frantic struggle. The entire limb hung limply in the muddy ground beside me, the joint swollen like a steamed bun, leaving me unable to move even a finger. On my bare right foot, the gash from the glass continued to ooze dark red fluid, mingling with the shredded grass on the ground. The surroundings were strewn with shattered aluminum alloy fragments and a smashed first aid kit. The machine gunner remained strapped to the seat post, his arms twisted at odd angles, still unconscious. The pilot up front lay slumped against the cracked windshield, his forehead marked with white lines from the shattered glass. Outside, the heavy rain continued to pour, streaming in through the helicopter's damaged cabin roof and soaking the back of my neck. I braced my good left leg against the warped cabin wall, straining to shift my body upward. My back pressed against the cold, bulletproof steel plate as I stared into the vast, dark void where the helicopter's door had once been. Wind howled around the gaping hole, just as I reached with my left hand to unbuckle the gunner's safety harness. A sharp, grating static suddenly crackled from the shattered radio on the helicopter's control panel. Zzzz. Zzzz. The noise lasted about 5 or 6 seconds. Then that calm, unnervingly precise computerized voice spoke again through the rust-speckled speaker grill. It continued reciting my daughter's school class number.